Good evening, and thank you for joining us for today's program. I'm Tom Campbell, the Director and CEO of the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. And I want to begin by expressing my gratitude on behalf of everybody at the museums for the generosity and support of so many of you this year. It's exciting that we're reopening the De Young and the Legion of Honor, but we couldn't possibly have done it without the steadfast support of our members and our donors. Although we aren't able to gather in person this evening, I'm really happy to at least have this virtual opportunity to share some of the exciting developments on the horizon for the museum. But before I begin, let's have a few Zoom housekeeping notes. During the presentation, I invite you to submit any questions you have or ideas or suggestions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And then following the presentation, Megan McCauley, the Director of Membership, will be joining me to moderate a Q&A at the end of the program. And I very much look forward to hearing your thoughts. Now, before I begin this presentation, can I have the next slide, please? It's an opportunity for me to share a statement that recognizes and pays respect to the indigenous people of the land where our two museums are so impressively located. This statement derives from work undertaken in 2019 by Christina Helmick, the curator in charge of our AOA department, and she led a collaborative discussion with thought leaders in the area, especially in relationship to the Ohlone community. So this is the statement that we will be using, I think, for many events in the future. The De Young Museum respectfully acknowledges the Ramaytush Ohlone, the original peoples of what is now San Francisco Peninsula, and acknowledges that the Greater Bay Area is the ancestral home of the Miwok, Yakuts, Patwin, and other Ohlone. Indigenous communities have lived and moved through this place over hundreds of generations, and indigenous peoples from many nations live and work in this region today. Please join us in acknowledging and honoring their ancestors, their elders, and their communities. Thank you. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk this evening about work we had done for our strategic plan, exhibitions and programs that are currently coming up, and then the reflections that we've had in the course of this whole shelter in place about the way we need to do a certain amount of recalibration of our work in regard to the strategic plan. So let me start with the strategic planning we did last year. Next slide, please. We refer to it as the museum plan, and basically during 2019, we did a lot of brainstorming about where we want to take the museums over the next 6 years. We call it our museum plan, and it was the result of a lot of internal work that was to impact every aspect of our organization, including the art, the collections and exhibitions, audience, support, membership, donors, and so on, infrastructure, and our workplace, our people and our culture. It includes short, medium, and long-term goals, and resulted from work with staff and members of the board. And also, very importantly, a lot of input from a group of our staff who we call it the Idea Committee for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access. And this group of staff have really been drawing attention to the importance of these issues. Next slide. At the same time, along with all of these issues, we've been thinking hard about how to build on the strengths of our two museums, their collections and their distinguished buildings and their beautiful settings. We've been thinking how to build on the reputation of the Legion of Honor for its European and antiquity collections, and to build it up as a center of scholarship and connoisseurship and engaging programming in exactly those areas. Next slide. And at the De Young, we've been thinking how to build upon the scholarship and programming around our American collections, which ranges from Mesoamerican, Native American, all the way through to modern and contemporary, and our African collections and oceanic collections, and also world textiles. So thinking about how to build on all of these great collections. But I think the events of the last 8 months have brought a new perspective in addition, because along with the pandemic, the health crisis, and the resulting economic crisis, we have to rethink our audiences. Tourism has evaporated. Many of our regular visitors may hesitate to come back quickly. And the efforts we've made to engage people online will continue to be very important as we go forward. And the other thing that I think has really come to the surface is that, and really with greater urgency since we developed the museum plan, is the need, really the mandate to root anything we do in a very thoughtful and intentional process to dismantle racist structures and racist points of view as they manifest themselves in the museums. So I'm going to come back and talk more about that later on. But let's just review a little bit what has actually happened over the last 8 months. Next slide. Even as we were thinking about the museum plan, we were overtaken by the city directive that we should close down and shelter in place. That was back on March the 14th, just as we had finished installing the Frida Kahlo exhibition. And we all scrambled to relocate our staff so they could work from home. Fortunately, we had a heads up. The mayor had given us an idea this might be coming some weeks before. So we set our staff up with laptops, developed new protocols, and the last 7 months have really been a roller coaster, a series of responding to different developing events, countless pivots, ups and downs. And I really have to take my hat off to the staff of the museum for their innovative, the way they've responded with such innovation to these challenges. It's really been quite remarkable. Next slide. In the early weeks of the pandemic, as it became clear how serious the situation was, I think if we had hoped originally we might be closed for a few weeks, it rapidly became clear that it was going to be months, and there was going to be a huge financial impact from the pandemic. Normal revenue streams were drying up, ticket sales, of course, gone, membership renewals dropping off when people had no idea how soon they'll be able to come back to the museum, and merchandise and restaurants falling away. So we had to do some fast footwork in thinking how to cut our costs and how to keep the books balanced. And I think one of the most gratifying and really amazing aspects of this whole crisis has been the way we saw the community stepping forward, the generosity of the membership, the generosity of the board and our donors. We launched a recovery fund quite early during the pandemic, recognizing we needed to make up for lost income. And we were really trying to prioritize retaining our staff in place as long as possible through the crisis. And it really is a reflection of the strength of the community around the museums that we were able to raise $6 million for that recovery fund. And this was donations from $10 or $20 all the way up through to six-figure sums. And in the current open invitational exhibition at the De Young, on the exit wall, we have a list, and you see it here. This lists all the 2,375 people who contributed to the recovery fund. So the financial donation has been a huge relief, but equally gratifying is knowing how invested the community around the museum is. And I know that many of you on this call donated above and beyond your membership dues to this fund. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Next slide. I mentioned the great flexibility of our staff, and one of the biggest challenges was to try and take a lot of our operations online. And so we've done a lot of work through the late spring and through the summer and the fall in terms of online programming. Here you see just as an example, a screenshot from a Facebook Live event we did at the end of April, where one of our curatorial assistants, Isabella Holland, discussed the period in which the French artist Elizabeth Louise Vigée-Lebrun was active, and the years she spent in exile following the French Revolution. Next. Indeed, I think many of our staff, and especially our special events team, have become whizzes in Zoom production. Here we see Claudia Schmuckli, our curator of contemporary art, in dialogue with the artist Mildred Howard. This was another of the events that was organized for our members in April. And this is in October, but I think it typifies the dialogue and the vitality that the museum has been able to sustain through these complex times. I would love to hear back from you if you have ideas, things you've especially enjoyed, or indeed things you'd like to see more of. And certainly I'm going to refer to a couple of new initiatives later on this evening that I hope you'll be interested by. Next. I also hope that many of you will have seen the virtual tour of the Frida Kahlo exhibition that we've put together. This film lasts for about 17 minutes, and it's based on the objects and the works of art in this exhibition. And it really is a very, I think, rich and vivid insight to this exhibition. Some of you will already have seen it, either the exhibition itself or the film. For those of you who haven't, what this show does and what the film does is it really explores the way that Frida, who had some tragic events in her life, including getting polio and having one of her legs disfigured as a child, and then being in a terrible road accident when she was 18 that broke her spine and broke many of the bones in her body, and really subjected her to a lifetime of operations and much pain, both physical and emotional. And this show really shows how she, mind over matter, she crafted the way she met the world, both as an artist and as a physical presence, to an extent dressing, using her costume to disguise the prosthetics and the surgical corsets she had to wear because of these operations. And it's a fascinating insight into the melding of art and person in a way that is familiar today when you think about performance artists. But of course, this was decades before such concepts existed. It's a truly, truly fascinating exhibition. So I do urge you to view this video and indeed to come and see the exhibition if you can. We have special member viewing days for the exhibition. Tickets sell like hotcakes, but do reach out to the membership office if you're having trouble making bookings. Next slide. During the shutdown, membership renewals have been a critical financial lifeline for us. We raised some $3 million in membership revenue during the closure. 99% of that was membership renewals. And I really appreciate the fact that so many of you did renew, even though you didn't know when you'll be able to come back to the museum. It's that kind of loyalty which is so important and significant to our bottom line. And of course, it is so nice now to be able to welcome people back in person, especially the familiar faces of many of our members. We've seen a significant uptick in membership renewals since our reopening, something like 1,700 new members in October alone. So we're hopeful that we will be able to rebuild the strength of our membership core. We have you are part of one of the biggest museum memberships in the country, which at its peak, it was something like 100,000 member households and slipped away during shelter in place. I think we're around 70,000 now, but we're optimistic that we'll be able to rebuild those numbers. And do please, a little plug here, do please, if you have friends who you think might like to join as members, please encourage them to do so. Or think, as we approach the holiday season, think about giving a membership as a gift to a friend or to a child, someone who might enjoy the museums as much as you do. So please excuse that little plug. Next. As you know, we have many benefits for members, special previews of exhibitions, special online programs, including this one. And one of the dearly beloved aspects of membership is the fine arts magazine produced for members. And I'm very gratified to have heard just a couple of days ago that the American Alliance of Museums awarded our member magazine, recognized the magazine with one of its, in its print publication design competition. We were second only behind the Smithsonian for the magazines and scholarly journals category, which was a very nice recognition of the work we're doing with this magazine. Next. So let's look a little bit at the current exhibitions. As many of you know, the De Young is celebrating its 125th anniversary this year. And as part of that celebration, we had thought to organize an open invitational exhibition for artists in the Bay Area. And this somehow took on much greater resonance than we had ever expected because of the shelter in place. I think we had perhaps expected to get a few hundred submissions, but when we opened our online submission portal at the beginning of June for 2 weeks, we got 11,500 submissions from more than 6,000 artists. It was absolutely overwhelming, really gratifying. And we had a jury of 7 people. We had 4 curators, curators Timothy Burkhardt, Karen Breuer, Jill D'Alessandro, and Claudia Schmuckli. And they worked with 3 well-established Bay Area artists, Enrique Chigawa, Mildred Howard, and Hung Liu. And together they reviewed all of these submissions, and they ended up selecting 877 artworks by 762 artists. And these works are hung salon style, corner to corner, floor to ceiling. And it's an amazing kind of cross-section of what people are thinking during the COVID era. And something else I should mention is that many of these works are for sale, and the artists are able to keep 100% of the proceeds. So this is really a way we felt that we could help artists in the Bay Area. Next. Installing the exhibition during COVID was quite a challenge because, of course, we couldn't have artists coming into the museum, and indeed we couldn't have them coming to our loading dock on John F. Kennedy Drive because that has been closed as part of the city's Healthy Streets program. So we had to arrange for curbside drop-off in the music concourse, and it was like a military operation. Next. Here is one of the happy artists. This was John Musgrove, who happened to be delivering on one of those very smoky days back in the late summer, back in the early fall, when I was visiting myself. And so what happened, the works were dropped off, they were processed, they were photographed, they were catalogued, and in some cases they were hung in the galleries within 2 or 3 hours. Next. And as you see, it was like putting together a huge jigsaw puzzle. Sometimes the pieces were different dimensions than we anticipated. So our registrars and our technicians and our designers and our curators really did a truly remarkable job in pulling together this show. And although all the artwork is by Bay Area artists, I think that the themes and the emotions that the exhibition reflects are truly universal. We're just delighted by the response to the show, and we're thinking hard about whether we could in fact make this something that recurs at a regular interval, possibly a triennial, so we can really continue to support the artists, the wonderful and talented artists in the Bay Area. Next. There's been a whole kind of knock-on effect with the exhibitions because of COVID. We had to cancel some exhibitions. Others have been postponed. One I'm especially looking forward to seeing is Last Supper in Pompeii, which draws on artworks and artifacts excavated in Pompeii from the volcanic ash of the eruption of Vesuvius in AD 79. And this exhibition looks at the role of wine and food in ancient Rome and seems especially resonant here in the Bay Area, which of course is such an important center of wine and food in modern day America. And this show, we're hoping to now ship it next February and to open it in March or April, COVID allowing. Next. Another show that I think will be very impactful at the Legion is an exhibition of the artist WANGECHI MUTU, who is based between Nairobi and New York. And she's doing a kind of takeover at the Legion, somewhat akin to the interventions we've had by artists like Urs Fischer and Sarah Lucas in past years. WANGECHI MUTU's work, over the years, she has created a pantheon of imaginary deities and female figures who draw on ancient mythology and who challenge a patriarchal colonial way of looking at the world. And I think it would be very interesting to have these works installed at the Legion of Honor, which of course, both in its literal form, a copy of the Légion d'honneur in Paris, and also in terms of much of the antique and the European art it displays, it to some extent, it embodies the kind of the colonial worldview that WANGECHI MUTU is challenging. So I think this will be a very, very interesting exhibition. Next. Oh, here are these examples of some of the paintings and another of the sculptures in the exhibition. And next. And then back at the De Young, hopefully in February, again, COVID allowing, we will be opening at the end of the month an exhibition about Calder and Picasso, which was originated by the Musée Picasso in Paris and the Calder Foundation. And this looks at the relationship between the works of the artists and the way that they both experimented with form and line and void and time, the way that these elements are so important to their work. So this should be an absolute, real treat. And then the last exhibition I'm going to mention is, next slide. Oh, no, penultimate exhibition I'm going to mention. We were due to have an exhibition, a retrospective of the artist Judy Chicago at the De Young this fall. It had to be postponed because of COVID. Now it will open next August. And this is a full retrospective of Judy's work from early projects like the dinner party all the way through to her current work about global warming. Judy thinks that COVID is the planet's revenge on patriarchal insanity. So there may even be some new works on that theme. And next. And then this is the last show I'm going to mention. Our new curator of Old Master Drawings, Furio Rinaldi, is hard at work mining our Achenbach collection of works on paper to uncover all sorts of wonderful pastels, many of which have never been shown. And this exhibition will feature 50 works from our own collection and about 30 works from local collections. And it spans from the Renaissance through the 18th century, all the way through to works by artists like Thornton Dial and Wayne Thiebaud. So this will be a real treat in store. So what I want to do now is turn a little bit to the future and thinking about one of the other really important aspects of our work. And this is something I referred to back in my introduction, the question of equity and racism. Lindsay, can I go to the next slide? As you know, I think we're all aware, even as we were going through the COVID pandemic, the national discussion of race and equity has taken on new fervor and urgency following some examples of police brutality and the killing of George Floyd back in the early summer. And this discussion has rightly engaged the whole cultural community, and museums in particular, I think, are reflecting what their responsibility is, and how we can step up in this moment. And I think for many of us have, we've been thinking about inclusivity and diversity. But I think this new discussion has made many of us, myself included, realize that for all of the work that we had been doing, we still had blind spots. There were still many issues that we need to address. And indeed, I think we have a new awareness of the degree to which our museums embody, to some extent, racist points of view. As I just mentioned, the Legion of Honor, the art it embodies, has all sorts of strands of European colonialism baked into the narratives we tell about the works of art. At the De Young, the very founding of the De Young in the California Midwinter International Exhibition back in 1894, that exhibition had installations of Chinese buildings and bazaars, Eskimo villages, Indian villages, Oriental villages that were presented from a very Eurocentric, colonial, and imperialistic perspective. And the collections the De Young holds, to some extent, especially with some of our historical American collections, they embody a colonial viewpoint that we have perhaps not been sufficiently objective in thinking about. And while for some that is purely an intellectual exercise, for others it is a continuation of a racist story that is oppressive, especially to Native Americans and to African Americans. So the question is, what can we do to make our museums truly inclusive and diverse? I think we've already started this work. We've, in part through programs, exhibitions, like the Revelations, Art from the African South, the Contemporary Muslim Fashion Show a year and a half ago, or more recently, the Soul of a Nation exhibition. We are diversifying our program. And through programs like Free Saturdays, we are removing the barriers to entry that keep some potential communities and visitors out. But I think there's more we can and we must do. And we have, over the summer, we've really been trying to lean into this issue internally at the museum and thinking hard about this. We had a town hall that was hosted by two of our African-American trustees, at which we started an all-staff dialogue. We invited a consultancy company based in Oakland to lead a series of discussions and seminars, both with the leadership and with our staff as a whole, about equity and inclusivity. And I have personally been meeting on a bi-weekly basis with members of our staff, our IDEA committee, looking for ways, small and large, that we can make changes to ensure that our workplace is truly inclusive and that the way we welcome our visitors is also inclusive and equitable. And I think there are a number of different sectors in a way that we can look at this. But it's very much my ambition to make significant change and to try and ensure that the fine art museums can be a leader in taking a fresh look at our collections and using our collections as a lens through which we can look at the histories that these collections come out of objectively and with inclusivity for all our audiences. And what I'm going to quickly do now in the last part of the lecture is just to sort of look at 5 different areas. So I mentioned collections. Next slide. I think we have to step back and make sure that we are being truly objective about the values, and in some cases the racist values, that some of our works of art tell. Here, for example, I'm showing what is one of the best known works at the Legion, Gérôme's The Bath, which in the past we have shown really uncritically. And what we've now done as part of an effort to rewrite our labels is to be much more explicit about the way that a painting like this reflected an imperialist and racist attitude at the time the painting was produced. And this is just one example. Our teams, both at the Legion of Honor and at the De Young, are really trying to take a fresh look at the stories we tell about our collections, with bringing in new scholarship and a greater objectivity, and also consulting with external experts to really make sure that we are being truly thoughtful in this respect. Next. Another area relating to collections where I think we can make very significant change is who we're buying. So many of the works of art in American museums are by white male artists. Many of them are very significant and very important, but we also need to make sure that we're showing works by women artists and artists of color, and that the traditional canon is challenged. So, I think a very interesting recent acquisition we made was the film made by Lisa Rehana, In Pursuit of Venus, that I hope many of you saw when this was installed last year. It was inspired by the early 19th century French wallpapers designed by Jean-Gabriel Charvet and made by Joseph Dufour, that showed a very simplified, idealized idea of the native peoples in the Pacific Islands when they first encountered European explorers. And what Rahana's film did was dive into that and explore a greater reality of what those encounters were about. Another acquisition I'm especially proud of that we made last year, next, is this enormous oil painting made by the Guyanian-born artist Frank Bowling, who lived most of his life in London, but also spent some time in New York. And this work, titled Penumbra, dating from 1970, is one of a series known as his map series that were meditations on the African diaspora, either by depicting Africa or by omitting it from world maps that essentially reflected a kind of the imperialistic and colonial mindset that had of much of the way we have thought about geography. Next. I think another very important way that we can address this crucial issue of diversity and inclusion is through our exhibitions. I just talked about the Soul of the Nation exhibition and the programming that we organized around it. And going forward, we will be looking very carefully at our program to make sure that it is really balanced and involving women artists and artists of color. And indeed, we have some exciting projects in the works. I've already mentioned the upcoming WANGECHI MUTU exhibition, and I'll look forward to telling you more about other shows in the future. Next. Another critical part of this, I'm going to think of it as a five-legged stool, is program and community. We've made efforts through programs like Free Saturdays, but I think there is much more we can do in reaching out to the communities of the Bay Area. The Open Invitational, reaching out to Bay Area artists, is one tactic. Another will be through school engagement, community groups, and through online efforts. Next. We've recently started a podcast series called Local Voices that aims to bring people from the Bay Area community into dialogue with artworks and other ideas embodied by our museums. Next. And we have also started a new program called Virtual Wednesdays at the Fine Art Museums. And again, this will be an opportunity to bring in many voices, diverse voices in every sense of the word, into dialogue with our collections, with our exhibitions, and with our programs. A fourth leg on this stool relates to our own staffing, and here there is real work to be done. Next slide. Over recent years, a number of surveys have been undertaken about the demographics of museum staffing. And actually, I'm going to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. As some of you may know, the fine art museums have two separately funded bodies of staff. Part of our staff, especially the security and custodial staff, are funded by the city. And in this portion of our staff, we have considerable racial diversity, as reflected by this pie chart. And now if we can go back. But the other part of our staff, which embodies the curators, the conservators, or the finance people, the marketing, the communications, we have much less racial diversity. And this is very typical of museums across the country. And this, I think, is going to be a critical issue for us to address. We need to think about the ways that we can make our workplace attractive to people of color and to institute hiring practices that make sure that we do hire a truly diverse staff so that our visitors will be engaged by a truly diverse staff. I think that will be very important to the integrity and vitality of the museum going forward. And then if we can jump now forward too. And then the fifth leg of this stool is our board. We actually have perhaps a more diverse board than many peer institutions, with approximately 25% of our board being people of color. But I think that this is very important that we will continue to work on this front. And indeed, we've recently established a board task force for inclusion and diversity. And so this new task force will be supporting us and working with us as we try and institute all of these efforts. And now I'm going to finish just a kind of demonstration that we are putting thought into practice. I'm going to show you two recent acquisitions before we go to questions. Next. The first is an enormous painting by the Bay Area artist Mike Henderson. It's about 9 feet by 9 feet square. And it is titled The Scream. It was painted in 1966. Henderson was born in rural Missouri, in a town where the Ku Klux Klan marched in every public parade and held cross-burning rallies. He moved to San Francisco in 1965 to study at the San Francisco Art Institute. And he painted this the following year. And he said that he painted it to try and express the anger and the frustration he felt inside. This was a time of the Vietnam War, civil rights protests, and police brutality. And this was his response to that era. Painted in 1966. It's somewhat depressing that this painting seems as pertinent, has seemed as pertinent this summer, 55 years later. And that's why we felt it was very important to buy it and add it to our collection of Bay Area artists. And then next. In a different vein, this is a work by JUDY Chicago that we also bought last year. This is part of something called the Birth Project that JUDY initiated between 1980 and 1985. And the simplest way to explain this really is JUDY's own quote. She said famously, "If men had babies, there would be thousands of images of the crowning," the birth moment. And her point is that most art in the Western canon that depicts childbirth, it doesn't depict childbirth. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures of young children, mostly portrayals of the Christ child, looking like he never had a sleepless night and that he was the immaculate birth, involved no pain or any complexities whatsoever. So Judy set out to right this wrong, and in her birth series, she created designs that were then realized by embroiderers and tapestry makers and quilters. And this piece we've just acquired is a beautiful embroidery of clearly a kind of figure, mother figure, giving birth. And the woman who embroidered this for Judy has put the names of her great-great-grandmother in the border around the tapestry and the dates of the children they gave birth to, some who lived and some who died. So for me, this is an especially resonant piece that I think is a very welcome addition to our very significant collection of world textiles. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, and we're going to move into the Q&A section, and Megan Macaulay is going to join me, and I look forward to answering your questions. And of course, in the future, I hope hearing more from you by email and by letter, or by seeing you in the galleries. So with that, let's find Megan.
All right, I am here. Tom, thank you so much for that presentation. I can't believe how much detail you got into that 50 minutes, and we do have lots of questions. So if it's okay with you, we'll jump right in. And just to let our audience know that we did have some questions submitted in advance, but I'm sure the presentation has inspired new questions. So feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many as we can here. All right, so our first question comes about Bouquets to Art, also known as BTA, one of our exhibitions. Can you talk about plans for Bouquets to Art moving forward into this new year?
Sure. In fact, I should have included that in the lecture, because as we toggled from in-gallery activities to virtual activities, the BTA this year, we had to go virtual, and it was the most incredible achievement that the staff and the auxiliaries created this amazingly rich offering for a week that included lectures and floral demonstrations and all sorts of activities. It was really tremendous. And we had something like 35,000 people tuning in to the different events. So it's perhaps our most successful virtual experiment. Well, looking forward, we are hoping that 2021 BTA will be back in the museum, and we are working hard on how to make that safe. But I think based on this year's experience, we'll also have a virtual component. And I think the dates, hopefully they've been texted to me.
I have them.
Thank you. Megan, have you got them?
Yeah, yes, it's June 8th through 13th, 2021.
Tremendous.
All things allowing. Yeah, thank you.
One of our most popular annual events, and we'll very much look forward to seeing people, COVID allowing, in person.
Yes, that was one of the first events I got to be involved in when I arrived to the museums in June. It was terrific. The next question here is about the De Young Open. So when thinking about the artworks that you've seen now in the De Young Open, the many hundreds of them, did anything emerge for you as something that unites or characterizes Bay Area art or Bay Area artists?
Well, I think the two things I was really struck by was the overwhelming response to the invitation. We've heard a great deal in recent years about how Los Angeles has become this great center of creative activity, which it has, but that has rather put San Francisco into the shade, and at least in the eyes of the press. And for me, one of the most exciting aspects of this was learning about so many artists living here in the Bay Area. And the other very pleasurable discovery was the amazing talent. I mean, technically, so many of these artists are very, very extremely skilled in their mediums. So those were two, uniting factors. I guess the other factor is that just there's such an amazing variety of approaches, from the figurative to the abstract, from the traditional to the very groundbreaking. And as I said in the lecture, although the artists are all local, the themes and the emotions have a kind of universal impact in this moment. So anyone who hasn't yet had a chance to visit, I do urge you, if you can, physically to come and visit. There is an online catalogue as well. So if you don't feel comfortable coming back to the museum, you can browse through that too. There are 850 works, so it will take you a little bit of browsing.
Yeah, dedicate some time.
Yes.
Yes, the DeYoung Open is included in general admission, which is always free for members. So we do ask you to reserve a ticket ahead of time, but I can't recommend it enough. I agree, it's absolutely wonderful. One of our members is also asking, are we tracking how many of the artists in the DeYoung Open have sold artwork as a result of the exhibition? It'd be interesting to know to what extent the show led artists to connect with buyers.
The answer to that is we're not. The goal is to allow the artists to sell their works if they would like to do so. And so the online catalog has the prices of the works and the contact details, but we have taken ourselves entirely out of the process in the hope that the artists can build relationships with multiple potential donors. That's another reason we haven't put up red stickers, because we hope that even if a work has sold, a potential patron can reach out to the artist and perhaps find other works that the artist has to sell. I hear anecdotally that many works have been sold. I've walked through the exhibition myself with a number of people, and I think practically everyone I've gone through with has subsequently bought something.
Wow.
I'm sure that as time goes by, we're going to get more specifics on this, but it does seem to have been very successful in that respect.
That's terrific. That's another great thing about that online gallery is you can actually now, when you go to the DeYoung Open website on our webpage, you can see those works and artist contact information, again, even if you're not quite ready to visit the museums. So on that note about for folks who are continuing to stay home, one of our questions is about digital content from Scott. Will the Fine Arts Museums continue to produce new digital content, virtual tours, programs, artist talks, etc., in conjunction with future exhibits and museum activities? He adds, they have been a wonderful addition to the museum experience.
Scott, thank you. Yes, absolutely. I think the quarantine has forced us to be very experimental, and we've had very positive feedback from members and audience about the films and the dialogues and the conversations. And going forward, we are absolutely going to try and continue to broadcast as much content as possible, both for those members of our audience who are hesitant to come back yet, but also because it's a way for us to reach out to a much wider audience than we had previously been reaching through purely in gallery offerings.
Absolutely. The next question is changing our angle a little bit, I think, to relate to some of the idea topics that you shared out, which I want to say thank you for that. I think that sort of Transparency and conversation here is so valuable, and it's coming in through the Q&A. So one of the questions is that some people feel as though museums should not be political spaces. They should stay out of politics. What's sort of your response to that line of thought?
I think that has been the traditional approach for some time. To some extent, it was based on an assumption of a kind of level playing field in politics and a kind of rather old-fashioned courtesy, where whatever your political point of view, you agreed to respect the other party. And I think, sadly, that sort of respect has rather diminished in the highly polarized political climate, the environment that we now live in. But I think more than that, museums are fundamentally educational establishments. We at the Fine Art Museums are city museums. We get a third of our funding from the city, and we have a responsibility to embrace all audiences, anybody who would like to come here. And I think that many of us over the last few years have increasingly come to realize the intellectual reality that the narratives we tell are rooted in both European colonialism and in American colonialism. But I myself recognize that to an extent, I saw this as an intellectual problem. And it's really this year and the heightened discussion through the summer that it's become clear to me that this is not an intellectual problem. This is an ongoing, very urgent issue that these narratives exclude many people from our museums. They make some audiences feel uncomfortable and excluded. And we have a responsibility to try and step back and be a bit more objective about the cultures that our objects came from, and more inclusive in the way that we welcome our visitors and help them understand the objects. So, long answer to your question, what I've realized is that we can't be apolitical. We are by nature political, but our responsibility is to try to, we have a responsibility to be open and welcoming. That is a political position in this day and age.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question, if you don't mind. I know we've stretched you a little bit here. And so this one is actually quite specific about membership and funding. So I'm happy to join you in the answer if needed. But this question comes from Rita, who asks, do you see the membership model at your institution or for museums generally changing in the future, and how? Does having multiple museums in your organization help?
Well, as I said in the talk, the Fine Art Museum's membership is one of the largest in the country. We don't have a big endowment, so we're very dependent on earned revenue. And the income and the support that the museum's membership gives to us is absolutely critical in allowing us to mount the programs, the exhibitions, all sorts of the activities that we undertake, and especially the educational activities. So we are extremely proud of the relationship we have with our members. And I want to strengthen and grow the membership. And with Megan recently joining the membership team, and along with sort of staff like Danielle Hobart that many of you know and who has a lot of experience here, I very much look forward to supporting membership in any way I can, as we think about how, how we can give you good value. You give us great support. We want to make it a worthwhile experience for you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I will add to that just by saying that I think we're absolutely seeing membership models shift and change in many different organizations, not just art museums, but nature centers, history museums, aquariums, zoos, etc. And that we're absolutely responsive to that, and also paying attention to the specific need here where we're located, since this is our community and you are who we serve. Well, Tom, thank you so much for spending your time with us this evening for this amazing overview and answering so many questions.
Real pleasure, and my thanks is to the membership. As I just said, you allow us to do what we do, so your support is critical. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I do want to acknowledge that there were questions, comments that we received that we weren't able to get to live here, but we will reach out after the fact because we do have some great questions and compliments as well about some exhibitions that folks have seen. To conclude our evening, you will see a poll coming up on screen here shortly that's going to ask you a few questions that will help us as we continue to plan and share these virtual events. I would like to very sincerely thank, of course, Tom for his time this evening, also to Lindsay, Carrie, Cheyenne, and the team behind the scenes who made this event possible. We are certainly not doing this on our own. And thank you, our audience, our members, for joining us tonight. Now, as you have heard this evening, we have reopened both museums, the de Young and the Legion of Honor. If you have not yet visited, please do make a reservation before you attend on our website, famsf.org. That's famsf.org. You must have a time ticket to enter the de Young and the Legion of Honor, so I highly recommend an advance reservation as we are booking up several weeks in advance. Once more, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We are so grateful to members for supporting us through our most challenging year to date, for seeing us through this reopening moment, and for staying so engaged and so supportive of the museums throughout this whole year and into the future. I love being your membership director, and we really love getting to spend this time with you. So thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.